Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. I have somebody that I admire very much. He got me into one of the people that got me into options and the poor man cover calls. I just enjoy his perspective. His videos on X and his daily stream is, I highly recommend it if you haven't seen it. It goes by Soleil. I can never say your handle. So can you please educate us on your handle?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Tony. We've been chatting for a while, and so this is great that we're finally able to do this face to face. Yeah, I just let people pronounce it Nithu or Nithu Sezni, just whatever. It's fine. It's been that way ever since I was gaming. Most people remember World of Warcraft, but even before that, I was playing like EverQuest and stuff.
Okay.
So back when I was a degenerate gamer, this has been my handle forever. But it's actually Knight Who Says Knee. It's kind of it's just a play on the Monty Python's Holy Grail episode, and only one guy has ever figured it out, and he was like, "Holy crap, I get it!" And then he posted a GIF underneath it of one of the Knights Who Says Knee, and I was like, "Winner, winner!" This is the first time in like 20 years anybody's ever guessed it, because the th is so obviously a th sound that nobody thinks to break it up between those two syllables.
That's true. I mean, I would have never gone to that. Can you give I'm sure some people may know you or your background, but can you give a brief background, just how you got into options and how you discovered Bitcoin?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the Cliff Notes version is I joined the Navy way back in the day, did that for 8 years. They trained me in laboratory medicine and did that in the civilian world for a while, and kind of backdoored my way into an IT career. And so um, I've always kind of felt a little, had that imposter syndrome going on, because when you work in the lab with military training, you just have a certificate from some Navy school, and everybody else is running around with degrees and this, that, and the other thing. And so you kind of feel like a little bit of a second class citizen in that respect. And then when you backdoor your way into an IT job, because usually when they do like electronic medical record conversions, they pick lab people to work on the lab stuff, and they go and get nurses to work on the nurse stuff. So it's a lot of people that are not uh, formally taught in don't have IT degrees. And so I'm around all these people who are just whizzes, and they can code and they can do this, that, and the other thing. So then you kind of feel like an imposter there. And in May of 2020, this guy that I met on Facebook, and a bunch of anarchists, let's just get it out there, but at least radical libertarian, thinkers. He's like, "Hey, me and all the guys that I'm working with, we're going to start trading options." And I'm like, "Okay, but I don't know anything about this." And he formed this trading club on Clubhouse. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that app.
Hmm.
And they would meet every day, but they were mostly doing like momentum trading. And I just still had my 9 to 5 job and really couldn't join, in on that full thing. So I just started listening to YouTube videos, probably 1,000 hours of YouTube videos around options trading, and just walking the dog, listening to videos on 2x speed. So again, feeling like a little bit of an imposter, because I got my YouTube university degree in options trading and had some success with it. And when the Fed lowered rates in 20, was it end of 2021, beginning of 2022, yeah, everything dropped out of the tech stocks that I was trading. And all the money that I made in a year and a half, I gave it back to the casino in like 3 to 6 months. So had to kind of dust myself off from there. And when I moved over to X, I thought, okay, let me try to get over a little bit of fear of public speaking, and I'll just make like a video a day, right? And so my goal for when I first started was I didn't even take weekends off. I was like, you know what, 7 days a week, I'm just going to make a video every single day. And at first it was, you kind of just feel stupid on camera and so self-conscious. But after a couple of months, and I was even trying to like plan, I'm like, okay, I'm going to write out some of the script and I'm going to say this, and I would record something. And if I made a mistake within like 10 to 15 seconds, I would just stop and start the whole video over. But if you screw up like 20 minutes in, like no way, you're not giving that up. And I thought, okay, I'll go back and I'll edit the videos or whatever. And at some point I just said, screw this, I'm going live. and it's just what it is, right? It's just if I hem and haw or I say something stupid or can't remember something, that's just how it's going to be. And people can watch that at 2x speed or skip past the boring parts if they want to.
Yeah. Honestly, that's probably the best way to do it. You just got to go, what's that Bill O'Reilly? We'll do it live. You just
Yeah.
got to, you just got to do it. I
Bleep
mean,
it,
you
we'll
just got
do
to
it
jump in.
live.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, well, just before we started recording, I was mentioning that during 2020, I was recording I got into the habit of doing maybe for 2 months or 3 months into doing daily commentary. And I think at one point I did 7 days a week. But I was
Mm-hmm.
mainly doing Monday to Friday. And you do get more comfortable with it, but I was doing it with OBS, and I just didn't have the time, or really, I was like, you know what, I'm just going to post this. It is what it is. I mean, there's tons of mistakes in those and whatnot. And they're still live if somebody wants to go through and torture themselves, I guess. But
Well, if people
but it's
like it,
good.
if people like it, do it. But for me, I was like, I kind of got comfortable talking, and I'm like, you know what, I like doing the talking part. If I ever start making some money off of this, maybe I'd hire a producer to edit those things for me, and maybe AI will get so good that I can just click a button and say, here, cut out the ums and ahs and cut out the blank spaces, and give me my time links,
Yeah,
all that good stuff.
improve me, enhance me somehow. So let's dive into the options. So I discovered your channel from it was True North. So I was watching the first episodes of True North, and then over time, you started showing up. For me, you were mysterious, and you were kind of like the main options guy. And that always intrigued me because I knew about options, but it was always I always considered options to be more of like a insurance policy. So that was my whole point. My whole point
Yeah.
of options was for insurance policy. And
Hmm.
then listening to you, I was like, okay, well, not only can I do X, I could do Y, and then the poor man cover calls, and all these things were being talked about, which I had heard before, but I never actually saw somebody applying it. And then when I went to your stream, which I hope I don't get this wrong, but I think it's the Orange Pill Investor. I think that's what you
Yeah.
call it.
If you don't want to watch 500 videos, which you probably shouldn't, my pinned post has like some essentials videos that I've selected, one video per strategy.
Really, that's all you need. And then the beautiful part about it is that you actually go daily and apply these principles and you explain it. You really, I mean, it's amazing how the education that you give out. I don't know if you understand what you're giving out. So you do as good a job as anyone that I've seen doing the hand holding and actually showing how to apply these principles. It's not everybody that can do it, and you do it well, and you actually take your time, you explain it, and you go through your thought process as you do the whole thing. So I just wanted to commend you. Is there anything that if you went back and you talked to yourself 5 years ago, 6 years ago now, you're like, okay, well, you know what? Forget this, focus on this. What's your process been like?
Yeah, I would say that I would go back and avoid too much leverage. I think I got suckered in by my own success, that first year and a half, because May 2020, that's like right after the COVID crash. So everybody was making money. And as long as you were bullish, you were still making money, right? And so
Yeah.
I always had it in the back of my mind, the imposter syndrome kicking in again. I always had it in the back of my mind, like, am I just getting lucky or is it really this easy? And it was a little bit of, it was a little bit of luck, because what I didn't realize is when the Fed raised rates, it was going to have just this outsized effect on any of the tech stocks. And by that time, I had transitioned from a purely, it's called the wheel. And what you do is you sell a cash secured put, so you have to put up all the money, right? You have to have it. It's not like in a excuse me, in a cash account. You can be trading on margin and leverage yourself. But I was trading in a cash account, and if you're going to be on the hook for $1,000 option position, you actually have to have the $1,000 in the account. And if you get assigned, now you own the shares. Step two of the wheel is you can turn around and sell a covered call. And that works because you are never really leveraged. And what I started learning about is when I saw the poor man's covered calls, I thought, holy smokes, I can actually collect twice as much premium. I can set up twice as many covered calls for the same amount of capital. I'm like, this is amazing. And what I didn't realize is, I had moved a ton of my positions, not only into Tesla, which is going to be, heavily reliant on the market just going up, because when the market goes down, it goes down even harder. And the fact that I was now leveraging. So instead of owning 100 shares, I was buying calls. And if the price of your stock drops 25%, that long call is going to drop by 50% or more. And so I did not realize that, it was as dangerous as it was. And the all of the videos that I watched were, I would say, probably 90% of the information that I got was either from Tasty Trade videos and this kid named In the Money, who's got a YouTube channel. And one of the main lessons that Tasty Trade will say repeatedly is your position size is the either the number one or the number two most important thing in options trading. And my account was probably 75% poor man's covered calls in Tesla alone. So
Yeah.
I wasn't diversified in ticker symbols, and I wasn't really diversified in my strategies. And the thing that I was very heavily into was a leveraged long position. So that actually got completely destroyed. Tesla went down from like 400 to like 100, I think is where it bottomed out. And so I kind of had to dust myself off from there. And if I had to do it all over again, I would stay within the range of maybe like 10 to 20% of leverage positions and keep my core position in non-leverage positions.
Yeah, I definitely. So when it got down to 100, so from 400 to 100, did you just write it, or expecting it to go up and just hoping and praying, or or did you actually make a move?
Well, the whole time it was crashing, it's like a buy the dip scenario, right? That's what you think. And as Bitcoiners, you can do that. And when you don't have a leverage position that has an expiration date, you can totally do that, right? So it really doesn't matter if you bought the top in the last cycle of Bitcoin at 67 or whatever the heck it hit, and then it drops to 15. It
Yeah,
literally doesn't matter as long as your time horizon is long enough. Your sats don't expire. They're still going to be in there in cold storage, and everything is just fine. But when you buy a long call, you have to choose an expiration date. And so you have to win by that date or try to roll. But if that thing is, has dropped in value by 50%, then when you roll it, you really can't roll to the same strike. And so I was trying to rescue those positions, and I was trying to, roll down. But every time you roll down, you're just rolling to another leverage position, right? So if Tesla was at 400 a share, let's say that the strikes on my long calls were at 300. That seems pretty safe, right? Is it really going to drop 100? Nah, it's not going to
yeah,
drop 100. And then it's 275, and you're like, holy crap. Okay, well, I'll buy the dip and I'll roll these down to 175, 200. And then the price is 175, and you're like, okay, now those are out of the money.
yeah,
And so you can try to buy the dip and rescue those positions, but it's been said a million times, but the market can stay irrational for longer than you can remain solvent.
yeah,
And I did try to rescue those positions, but at some point I had to just surrender. And I'm like, dusted myself off, and I'm like, okay, I'm just going to go back to primarily non-leveraged positions. And I kind of repeated that mistake again after November 2024, when strategy hit 500 a share. It was like, okay, we made money on the 400 strikes, the 300 strikes, the 200 strikes, we'll make money on the 1080s too. And those
yeah,
ended up being losers all of 2024. Excuse me, and in 2025, I mean. So I repeated that mistake again to an extent, but I did at least manage to take grain of salt's advice. The only advice that he's actually ever given was, when you get life-saving money, take 20% off the top and treat your family, put some money aside to pay the taxes, and just congratulate yourself. And
yeah,
so I did that to a certain extent, and that kind of saved my bacon, that I wasn't completely just ridiculously irresponsibly over leveraged in 2025. But I did kind of repeat that mistake to a certain extent. Um, but I did hold on to a core position of shares that I just refused to convert into long leverage. And of course, those have survived. And so I guess I repeated the mistake, but to a lesser degree. So maybe I did learn a little something.
So you still have the poor man cover calls. Are you just rolling and trying to with at least strategy? Are you rolling those on the way down and kind of working that out?
Yeah, I don't really try to save a position necessarily because once you open the contract, you're locked in. There's really nothing you can do to save it if the price goes in the opposite direction. And it's the same thing with the covered call, right? So if you sell the 200 strike and the price goes to 225, people always want to know, "Oh, what do I do?" Well, there's nothing you can do. Like you owe the
Yeah,
money, right? You either let your shares get called away, or you can pay the $2,500 to keep that position, which is probably going to be more than you sold the covered call for. So there's really no way to fix these positions once you're locked in. So you have to be prepared and accept the risk in either direction, up or down, when you get into the position, because once you're in it, there's really no turning back.
yeah. I think one of the biggest lessons with poor man cover call is when the price goes against you, you think, at least naively, you think when you're not used to it, that I'll just roll down and I'll take this profit and I'll just take this profit and I'll just take this profit. But the problem is what you're saying is that there is an expiration. So if your long call is, I guess, out of the money, yeah, it's out of the money as it's going down and it expires, then you're screwed. Yeah, you kept whatever profit from your roll from your cover call, but it's rolling down and it's nowhere near the amount of the actual your main position. It's leverage, and you have to know how much you're putting in. If you go 100%, then that's just irresponsibly long, which I guess is the nature of
Yeah, yeah.
of
If it's
us.
if it's causing you to lose sleep, it's too big of a position. And
Yeah,
that's one weird thing that I thought I was in November 2024. I thought I was managing my margin use like responsibly. I know we like to laugh and joke. We're in the irresponsibly long, MSTR club or whatever. But that's supposed to just be for laughs and fun and giggles, right? You're not supposed to literally be putting your entire future at risk on degenerate weekly just YOLO positions.
yeah,
And yeah, sorry, it should be something that you don't lose sleep over. And when I eliminated all of my margin use in November, um, I felt great. It was like this weight lifted off my shoulders, and it surprised the hell out of me because I thought, oh, I'm only using a little bit of margin, compared to my portfolio size, and I think I was using a responsible amount of margin. But when I had zero margin use, I that like this whole wave of stress lifted off my shoulders, and I was like, okay, I cannot be liquidated now. Like no matter
yeah,
what happens to strategy's stock price, I cannot be liquidated. And that was a huge relief. I've since started using what I think is some responsible margin use again over 2025. Um, but I wonder if I'm going to feel the same way. Like if strategy pumps again and we get a nice rally and I unload that margin use, if I'm going to get that same feeling of relief, or maybe I'm just kind of dead to the pain at this point.
yeah. Actually, that's a good segue because now I really want to see your perspective on strategy. Obviously, I believe you're still bullish and you're going to be bullish long term. We had that whole run up in 2024. That was pretty wild. And then we had 2025, which Bitcoin surprised us. I think we can say. So, strategy. What were your original thoughts on it? Did anything surprise you in 2025? And where do you see the future of strategy and the preferreds?
Yeah, there's a couple of things here. The I want to talk about, a lot of people like to argue, and I think it's important to understand what being open-minded actually means, because everybody says they are and thinks they are. And if anybody wants to actually, like know if you're open-minded or not, you should be able to identify your falsification criteria. So this is the perfect question that you're asking. If you're bullish on something, you have to be willing to say, okay, what would have to happen to make me like reverse my position and agree that the bears were correct? And if you can't do that, you are not being an open-minded person and engaging really in good faith. And so originally, as an option seller, I just didn't care about any of the stocks. I had no love for any stock. I let myself get a little bit too in love with the amount of premiums that I could get from Tesla. Um, but for the most part, I was very just ambivalent and agnostic about what tickers I traded. If they were delivering tons of premium, the most like market research I would do would be like, are they in bankruptcy talks? You know what I mean? Like that 5 minute quick search just to make sure that they're that's not going to go to zero was the most that I would do. And I think that Quant Bros 1 was what made me freak out, and that's probably one of my first episodes that actually blew up. And again, imposter syndrome is rearing its head again, because when I was invited to be in that group, I'm looking around at these guys and I'm like, there's no freaking way that I belong in this company, right? But I guess I had just done enough work on the show that I demonstrated some kind of ability, and was able to get picked up with those guys. But yeah, it was Quant Bros 1 that kind of blew my mind. And I thought, you know what, maybe there's a more of an advantage to be actually bullish on a particular stock if you truly believe that it's going up. And so I adopted that bullish position on strategy. And my thesis has always really been the same. And um, it's kind of self-serving to quote Saylor on this one, but he was probably talking about the Mag 7 type of stuff. He said, you want to invest in a position when it's disrupting and the clear winner. And he always
Yeah.
gives the examples of, Netflix putting Blockbuster out of business, Facebook putting MySpace out of business, things like that. The iPhone putting the Nokias of the world out of business. And that's basically what I thought that strategy was doing, is disrupting the financial market, and they're the clear winner. Nobody's going to get more Bitcoin than them. They were the first, brave company to buy Bitcoin. Then they were the first to borrow money to buy Bitcoin. And, now they're the first to issue, credit to to buy more Bitcoin. And so that thesis has never changed. But um, to be fair, I have to ask myself that question. I was like, what would my falsification criteria be that I would have to admit something has fundamentally changed, because something definitely definitely happened to the price, right?
Yeah.
We all thought it was going to 1,000, and 500 was what we got. And so I would have to say that if 4 to 5 years goes by and they're not outperforming Bitcoin, right? If there's not a fluctuation between the well, not even necessarily in the MNAV, because technically them using leverage, and they like to call it amplification because credit's a little bit different than borrowing straight up. But technically, they can trade at 1x MNAV forever and still outperform Bitcoin if they're buying at 30 to 50% amplification.
Hmm.
So, if 4 years goes by and they're not able to outperform Bitcoin in a meaningful way, like if it's up 10%, they're using 30% amplification, but they're like only up 10% versus Bitcoin. Like,
Yeah.
okay, that's not worth me risking not having a sovereign asset, right? At that point, I'm probably just going to buy Bitcoin. So
Yeah.
that's the main one. I guess if they did like shitcoinery type of things, um, or just had too close of associations with those kind of people, I would have to kind of keep an eye on that. The most bearish thing that I saw so far that made me at least want to look at it was the Bitcoin for corporations. As far as I can tell, is coordinated between Strategy and Bitcoin Magazine. and I'm not a huge fan of
Nakamoto.
yeah, well, yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Bailey. So by by association, I'm not a big fan of Nakamoto, and so that kind of gives me a little bit of pause. But in a certain sense, it's like, okay, well, who are you going to do business with? And as long as that relationship doesn't go, I guess, a little bit too far, and if it starts to become uh, non-Bitcoin focused, then that would cause me to also take a step back and become concerned. But as long as they're disrupting and they're the clear winner, my thesis really hasn't been changed. And yeah, what happens over a 1 year period, it really doesn't bother me too much.
The future is going to be interesting with strategy because of the preferreds and all of these things that they're rolling out. But there is a danger that I see from using AI to produce these products and generate results. And there's a lot of bias. And I'm sure that it's not just him doing it. There's a whole team of people doing it, and lawyers and regulators and all kinds of things that are involved in this. It's not just AI spitting something out and using it. It's not AI financial slop, I hope.
Hmm.
But there is a risk of that, right? These ideas that haven't been tested before, while they could be hopefully revolutionary, there's a chance that it hasn't been done for a reason. And always being the guinea pig is kind of, it's a little scary. I try to focus on the positive mainly, but there is that risk too, that the AI is giving you some, I'm not going to say a false positive, but it's just feeding you info that may not be completely accurate. And I think we had a hint of that. And I'm going to completely mess this up, but I think it was like around August or before that, where everybody was freaking out because the prefers didn't have the cash for the dividends. That was freaking people out. And I think that was kind of like the beginning of the downward spiral, on top of the fact of October 10th or whatever it was with those liquidations that just drove the price of Bitcoin down itself. And that doesn't help at all.
Yeah.
Strategy. So the future of strategy for me is I think it's fantastic. I just it's the AI and these new products that have never been done before, while exciting, kind of give me a little pause and kind of
Oh yeah.
stress me out a little bit.
Yeah, I argue like tooth and nail with AI when I use it. And that's one thing that I had to tell my son who just graduated from college, and he loves to just go to AI for everything. And in a way, it is kind of right in the sense that we can have Twitter beefs and all of that different stuff, and people are just pulling stuff out of their butts. But he's like, you know what? You go use your AI and I'll use my AI, and we'll come back. And it's not like we have to be mad at each other. It's like our AIs are beefing. It's like you
Yeah,
can prompt it and try to get it. So in that sense, it takes a little bit of the personal attack kind of thing out of it. But I had to remind him, I'm like, you have to argue with AI. You can't just go and ask it for the result and think, okay, now I know the result. And
yeah,
he is kind of these guys. They are probably pretty smart with it. He will prompt the AI to also like fact check itself and give a grade or report on the um like the percent truthfulness of the sources that it's giving you the answer from. So people who are smart about AI, I think, are figuring this out. But if you're just going back to AI looking for quick, easy answers, and you're not going to wrestle with it and argue with it and push back, I think you're probably doing AI wrong. Just
yeah,
for an example, I had a business idea, and I'm like, how do I do this? And Grok's telling me, oh yeah, you do this, do this, do this. And after like 20 minutes of going back and forth, Grok's like, oh, actually, this is illegal. You can't do this. And I'm like, what? Then why did you tell me to form this company and get this paperwork and file this and do that? And it's like, no, you'll go to jail. This is a felony. Like, this is illegal. The SEC and the you'd have to have a casino license, which costs like, I don't know, $1 million freaking dollars for an online casino license. Yeah, they gatekeep the hell out of the stuff like that. And so I had to go back to square one with that, and like, no, I'd rather stay out of jail. Thank you very much.
yeah. So okay, so I think to summarize your future position on strategy, you're optimistic but you're always looking for, you want to be intellectually honest with yourself. And you want to say, hey, look, if in 4 or 5 years we're not outperforming Bitcoin for whatever reason, the idea was maybe not flawed is the right word, but you might as well stick with the underlying asset
Yeah,
at that point.
yeah, exactly. And even, you're the only reason to expose yourself to third party risk is for an outsized return. And so, people saying Bitcoin is the hurdle rate, that's absolutely true because you can just get Bitcoin's returns with no outside risk. There's carry risk, like you're gonna have to safeguard it. You're gonna have to keep your seed phrase memorized and safe, and potentially defend yourself from $5 wrench attacks and things like that. We say it's free to hold your Bitcoin, but it's not exactly that free, and that's why you kind of sympathize with people who have said, you know what, I sold my Bitcoin and I'm just buying IBIT because they're so fabulously wealthy at that
Yeah,
point that self custody becomes a negative drag on their happiness. Like it's not nothing, right? And even Saifedean Ammous has said that he thinks it will be possible in the future to lend your Bitcoin at negative interest rates, which sounds ridiculous. That sounds
yeah,
like that just seems impossible. It's like, well, don't I have to get something back for not enjoying my asset? And his reasoning was exactly what I just said, is that there is a carry cost. So you're almost kind of doing someone a favor by them not having to go through the motions of storing it and safeguarding it and all of those things, even though for
yeah,
Bitcoin it's much cheaper than having I don't know, half a ton of gold in your basement or something ridiculous like that. But he envisions a future where people will just not necessarily be so interested in loaning their Bitcoin out for yield, but for equity. If you've got a really good idea and like, hey, I figured out how to cure cancer, right? Okay, I'll loan you some of my Bitcoin and I want a stake in the company, right? That kind
yeah,
of makes more sense in the future. And I kind of hope that's the way that it goes. I think that chasing yield is and I'm not, this isn't even my own idea. This is probably me just trying to interpret some stuff that I heard Jeff Booth say, is that um, some companies will offer a yield, and then another company, to be competitive, will offer more and then more and then more, and at some point somebody overextends themselves and gets
yeah,
liquidated, and that's kind of the risk that we run. And we're going to have to monitor the preferreds in that same way, because if they have to pump the interest rate up to 20% to keep it pegged at 100, and
yeah,
Bitcoin's CAGR drops below 20, well, now that's not accretive anymore. And I think it would take so long for that to happen that they can retire the preferreds, if it ever does. And if something like that happened and they had to peel off, 10% of their Bitcoin stack to fund something like that, maybe something like that would necessarily happen in the future, but it wouldn't be like an existential threat for their company. And it really gives them kind of a long runway to figure out what to do next. Because the one thing that I kind of have to agree with, I love to razz the 1x MNAV bears, but the one thing that they kind of have somewhat correct is that the MNAV for all of these companies does trend to 1x MNAV at some point. But that's no different for you and me. And it's no different
yeah,
from any of the companies that have no Bitcoin. So think about that. If you're a company and you have no Bitcoin, the value of your company is trending towards 1x MNAV, which is zero. Your
yeah,
company is trending towards zero, because if you don't have Bitcoin and everyone else does, then you're basically not going to be a company in the future. And I don't know if that takes 10, 20, or 50 years, but at some point, in my opinion, hyper Bitcoinization takes over, and you have to deliver some type of value besides just issuing credit. And right now, for strategy, it's their business intelligence software.
yeah,
And like I was saying about the long runway, if they've got 20 or 30 years before they siphon all the money out of the bond market, and that's a pretty long period of time for them to come up with the next iPhone idea. But I guess that would be another thing to watch out for, is that when Bitcoin's CAGR does start to approach the interest rate on the preferreds, and there's less and less, profit to like arbitrage in between those two values, do they have another idea? And if they
Yeah.
do, then that's bullish. But I don't have to worry about that for 20 or 30 years. And if everything goes in that direction, uh, it'll be somebody else's problem. It won't be mine.
I definitely agree with that. So in hyper Bitcoinization, I guess let's segue to Bitcoin itself. So how did you find Bitcoin? Why are you so bullish on it? And are there any threats or anything that keeps you up at night? Which will lead us to the following segue, I'm sure.
So I got into Bitcoin again through a really smart guy that I met on Facebook, and I'm dating myself a little bit even for just being on that platform. I quit it several years ago because it's an absolute dumpster fire, but I was very lucky to meet a small group of very switched on people, and this guy put me onto Bitcoin and also to Tesla,
Wow.
and he actually even started this little group called Bitcoin Basics on Facebook, and I ended up being one of his moderators. And so I was going out there and I'm like doing research, and I bought this cold storage device called a Keep Key. Have you ever heard of this thing?
Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that was like way back in the day, and I would do little reviews. I bought one of those, and then I ended up bought a I think it was a
So that was
Ledger.
probably pre 2017, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I
Wow.
got into it. I remember getting into it right around the time of all of the forks and like block size wars and stuff like that. And at that time, I just thought it was cool. I'm like, oh, you're gonna fork this and give me an extra set of Bitcoin,
Yeah,
and I can like sell it and just not care. But at that time, I didn't really know which fork would win, so I would, I was kind of like paranoid to sell either one of them, right? When
yeah,
Bitcoin Cash came out, I was like, all right, well, I'm gonna stack both of these and see which one wins, right? Um, and so I wasn't really a maxi at that point, and I even started getting into the shit coining, and I would trade, Ethereum for, um, XRP, and there were just all of these coins that were coming out, and I learned my lesson there because trying to trade in and out of Bitcoin, I probably ended up with about 75% less Bitcoin. You know what I mean?
it's
Like,
true. Yeah,
like, oh, Ethereum's getting cheap. I'll buy the dip, right? Well, how do you buy the dip? You have to peel off some Bitcoin to buy some Ethereum. And at one point, I think I had ended up with like, I can't remember how many Ethereum I had, but I was down to like zero point 0.1 Bitcoin. I had just sold it all the way down to zero point 0.1, and I'm stacking all this freaking Ethereum. And then at some point, the light switched on, and I was like, oh, this is the only one that's not going to zero over a long period of time. Like, Bitcoin is the winner. And then at that point, I was just like, uh-oh, I have to exit all of my altcoin positions and just go 100% Bitcoin. And I didn't wait for the market to recover. I just took my losses, and I was like, once that realization hit me, I just had to just suck it up and admit defeat. Um, and actually, so what was the question? I get off on tangents. I don't remember what the hell we're talking about.
no, just getting your
Oh, get
background
into
on Bitcoin
Bitcoin.
itself. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so, yeah, so this guy just got me into it, and I shitcoined for a while, and then I think my aha moment was after watching, what was it, like 25 hours of the Sailor series on
Okay.
Breedlove's channel, and that was I was like, oh crap, so this is what money actually is and has been for all of human history, and this is why it's different. And that was what kind of snapped me out of the degenerate altcoin phase.
Yeah, I think everybody has those stories. I've always heard of inflation, so I kind of understood that Bitcoin is scarce, divisible, finite, yada yada yada. But it never really clicked. And I think it was around 2019 or 2020 that I was like watching a lot of these not Safedine. Well, maybe Safedine. Yeah, Safedine was already. I think his book was already out. But
Hmm.
Andreas Antonopoulos had a bunch of videos and just kind of deep diving into that. And then Sailor. We're very lucky now that we have a lot of education and a lot of people that are
Yeah.
very qualified to explain. So you found Bitcoin, you believed in Bitcoin. Is your conviction growing? Is it the same? And any fears going forward?
You talking about with Bitcoin?
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't have any fears necessarily, but I do believe that it's not enough to just stack sats. So uh, I think if that's all you can do, that's great. But at some point, I think that you have to participate in the network. And so I finally got up the, I guess, got rid of my procrastination and started running a node. And I think I probably will need to start mining as well. And the guy who got me into it, he used to mine like crazy. He told me this story about how he found some guy that would like rent a room, but with utilities included. And he had like 20 miners in there, and
wow,
just because of the electricity was free, and he had
that's
exhaust
crazy.
pipes like going out the window. And the landlord came in one day, and he was like, he had to like replace the air filters in the place, and he's like, what the freaking hell is going on in here? You've got like a freaking a server farm in here. And but at some point, when I was like, hey, do I need to mine? And he's like, dude, just stack sats, because the cost of the miners and having to get them replaced, he's like, just from an overhead perspective, just
Yeah,
get off zero, right? Was his thing. But now I kind of feel obligated to contribute some hash power to the network as well. And so I think the segue that you were kind of mentioning is the knots versus core debate. And if you're going to run a node, you have to choose a protocol, right? And so when I started looking at this, and when I started looking at the knots versus core debate, I I look at this from a libertarian property rights perspective. And I I think it's kind of hilarious that the I guess the core side, they want to almost call this like a free speech kind of thing, like, and the filters people are censoring. But the reason why I think that is ridiculous is because um, there is a part of property rights is being able to exclude others from your property, right? And Bitcoin at its heart is a distributed ledger. And if I came to you today and I said, hey, do you want to have a distributed ledger? Just the two of us, and you trusted me to a certain extent, you'd be like, all right, that sounds okay. And then I said, no, 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 no. We're going to let anybody on the planet put, to put files on here. And then you go, okay, well, it's just going to be financial transactions, right? It's just going to be a ledger, plus one here, minus one here, plus two here, minus two here. Like, no, 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 no. We're going to let people put any kind of images that they want on your hard drive. No, that's like ridiculous insanity to even imagine that anyone would allow complete degenerate pervert strangers around the world to use their hard drive as a free storage device. That is completely ridiculous on its face. And the counter to that, I think I've heard the majority of the core arguments at this point. So if you say that to them, they'll say, oh, well, the core argument, or the rebuttal to that, is the fees of the filter.
right.
And the reason why that is complete absolute insanity is because you can tell that they have never uh, done adversarial thinking in their life, right? So game theory says that the way that you win a game is by cheating. And Bitcoin is supposed to be the first thing that solved the Byzantine generals problem. It makes it so that you can't cheat, but it doesn't prevent someone from outside the system trying to be a parasite on the network from the outside. It only incentivizes people inside the network to safeguard themselves. And so if you've got someone, uh, a degenerate pervert that says, hey, what is it worth to that person to get other people to store their illegal images? It's priceless. And so
Yeah,
now you're setting yourself up. Okay, well, if we pay the fee and we're willing to out compete them on cost, that's basically paying the ransom. And when you pay a ransom, they just ask you for more and more and more, and the price goes up. So the cost to, if you're going to use the fees or the filter example, the cost is infinite because there's an infinite demand for perversion by insane people, and so that's just not a solution, I think. So I do believe that this is a credible attack on Bitcoin. I think it has a very small chance of um success. So I'm as bullish as I have ever been in, on Bitcoin itself. But Bitcoiners can't just stack sats and think that this is someone else's problem. It's open source, so other people are reviewing the code, and I don't have to do anything. I no longer believe that. I think at some point, um, if you if you believe in Bitcoin, you actually have to participate in the network and run a node, potentially mine, and I'm as vocal as I can possibly be on X, probably to my detriment, because you know as soon as you take a controversial position, half the people will hate you and the other half will love you for it. Um, but I think those are necessary things to do.
Yeah, I agree. It's so I've had a lot of back and forth in this, and just internal dialogue with the whole core and knots debate, which is just spam in general. And at the end of the day, I definitely don't want spam. I don't think anybody wants spam in a network. How do you control
Right.
it? Whatever action we do to try to stop it, they'll try. As long as it's a valid transaction, it'll go in there anyways. So the only way to that's valid to fight against it is to for the fees to eventually become so prohibitive that it doesn't make sense to use it for that purpose. I see both sides. I really do. I can see how the fees can be enough of an incentive, but I also see how somebody who has enough money can attack the system and just be irrational about it. You can be irrational way
Yeah.
longer than some people can be solvent. So I can see both sides of that story. Yesterday, I found your back and forth with Pierre. Can you kind of summarize the back and forth a little bit?
Yeah, and so I've been following Matthew Cratter on this issue quite a bit, and so I quote tweeted his most recent video, and Matthew had put a clip in there of one of Pierre's interviews, and it is kind of crazy because there are so many brilliant people who are on the core side of this debate, which I would go back to the thing that we like to say all the time is that Bitcoin is a courage test, not an IQ test. And I think this is just another example of that. And I understand that I'm complimenting these people at the same time as I'm kind of insulting them, right? But
Yeah.
um, I think that's just what totally represents the, you're not technical part of the argument, because you've got all of these, core developers that will say, well, all of the people like Matthew Cratter and, different other influencers, I guess you would say, is they're not technical, and that's why we should listen to the devs. The obvious counter is that there's Luke Dasher, who's one of the most respected devs in
Yeah.
Bitcoin history, and um, he's clearly not for core. And it just kind of reminds me a little bit of, and I guess I'm going to get a little bit political here, but the cultural Marxism of redefining terms and like trust the science, like the trust me bro kind of thing. Uh, so depending on how far you want to go with these types of conspiracy theories, that was kind of what we were told, is like, hey, here's the people who are in charge. We know better than you. We're technical and you're not. And so just listen to us, because we've got your best interests at heart. Like, we can just plan this for you. And that's kind of the way that I feel about core at this point. It's kind of an empire that has grown, and it more resembles uh, central planning than it does this decentralized kind of cypherpunk ethos that it had in the beginning. And I do think that it's going to be a self-healing event, and we will either reroute around the spammers, and maybe BIP 110, which has been proposed, will solve this problem, or there's more extreme solutions like the cat, which would actually freeze the spammers transactions, and basically rug them. I don't know that I would support something going that far, but I'm definitely listening. But to your original question is like, how did this go about? So I quote tweeted Matthew Crowder's post, and I said something a little bit provocative, and I had actually uh, bookmarked a few quotes that I knew were going to be useful in the future, and so I didn't really know that anyone would even respond or give a crap, but I basically said that what was omitted in Pierre's statement, which was, if I remember correctly, he was saying that, look, let's just say that some black swan event did happen, right? This is me trying to give my best recollection of his position. Pierre was saying, like, hey, even if this does happen, node runners are safe, right? We're not going to be like rounded up, right? Anybody who's running a core node, if some CSAM were to get on the blockchain, like they're not going to be rounding these people up and like caging them. And even if Bitcoin's price crashed to $1,000 a coin, like it would rise from the ashes at some point and go back to taking over the world, right? Imposing the free market on the world. And so I agree with that. But what I called attention to was that is ignoring, from a Bitcoin Treasury Company perspective, just because the node runners are safe doesn't mean that publicly traded companies are safe. And that wasn't me, he took it as being threatening, but this was more of like a warning, right? I have about 150% of my net worth in Bitcoin and derivatives. Okay. I'm freaking all in. So this isn't like, I'm not trying to sabotage Bitcoin treasury companies when my entire family's livelihood depends on them. Right. This is a warning. Like, I don't want their share prices to crash because they've built their entire business model on stacking sats. And then if you have a fiduciary responsibility, your fiduciary obligation to your shareholders is to make sure that those sats do not become worthless. So, I don't begrudge corporations for being corporations, but they are extended significant privileges by the government. Some people might even go so far as to say that they're just government entities because, they filed the paperwork and now they can, ATM and do all of these different things. But as a citizen, we all, the counter to that is we are afforded the privilege of being able to hold them accountable for safeguarding value in the company. And I just think it would be very difficult. Let's just say you've got company A running knots and you've got company B running core. And if CSAM got on the blockchain and Bitcoin drops from 100K to $1,000 a coin, and all of the shareholders sue, and you go to court, and company A says, Your Honor, we ran the filters. We did everything that we possibly could to make sure that our nodes did not relay this information. We could not prevent the rest of the network from allowing it onto the blockchain, but we did everything we could possible. I think a jury would listen to that and be like, okay, I kind of get it. And then company B says, well, we went ahead and relayed a legal material, but the fees of the filter, like that's just not going to cut it. Like, if you didn't want this on the blockchain, you should have paid more to prevent it. That's not going to cut it. No, no person with any shred of morality, and I know people want Bitcoin to just be like an objective morality position and it just be neutral and just not have anything to do with morality itself. But that's kind of impossible if you're going to allow the money to not be money. And that's kind of the point. So arbitrary data corrupts money from being just a financial transaction. And I think that's kind of like the death blow in this argument, is that if I have an electronic dollar that I send you, it has no moral value. It's not amoral. It's not immoral. It's just moralless. It's a nothing. It's ones and zeros. But if I send you $1 and printed on that dollar is like child sexually assault material, it's not freaking money anymore. So it's an it changes the moneyness, right? Anything that makes my money less money, I'm opposed to. And I think that is where the attack becomes like credible. But if you can't attach enough arbitrary data to create an image, then of course it can stay objective forever. Um, so yeah, so I kind of pointed out that a Bitcoin Treasury Company that has unwittingly participated in running the protocol that has allowed this black swan to occur is going to be held accountable in court, and that wasn't really received very well.
The court case I hadn't heard before, and that makes a lot of sense. Hopefully, one day somebody will come up with a with a solution that everybody agrees on, but I don't see
Yeah,
that kind
yeah,
of happening.
and the knots thing, I supported it at first, but if I have to give the core people a little bit of credit, some of the things that they have said that it's not going to solve the problem, I mean, they were correct, right? The only way that knots would have solved the problem completely, right? It did, I think, help the situation, but it wasn't going to solve it to 100% degree unless, like, I don't know, 95% of the network was on knots. Then it would have been very difficult
Yeah,
because, like, none of the nodes are relaying anything to anybody else, and you're just really not going to find a node willing to relay that information. But
right.
we've got some proposals now that would move those things to the base layer. And so I think BIP 110 has a legitimate chance to solve this problem on the base layer. So I'm bullish that something like that happens. And um, yeah, there's other solutions, but the free market will deliver, I think, an answer to this. So I'm not really worried. I'm not really worried that Bitcoin will fail unless we just assume that it will won't fail without doing anything. So
Yeah, no,
I'm just
I
trying to
hear
do
you.
my part here. I talk about some of the things that I talk about because I don't generally hear them being framed that way. But like, you don't even have to get into the weeds on some of this crap that I'm talking about. But what you mentioned about the bloat, you could just stop there. Um, the the quote that I really like, and I can't remember who said it. I wish I could attribute it to them, but they said, on any Bitcoin issue, I always side with whichever side wants the most number of node runners. And so if you're allowing bloat, that just means that there's some guy who is trying to run a node, but he can't because bloat
Yeah,
has priced him out. And
yeah,
if some poor person wants to run a node and just can't, because all of the spam has been allowed to price him out of the node market, then there will be less node runners, and at some point it turns into Ethereum, because that's Ethereum is so bloated that they've got a couple of different kinds of nodes, and you kind of have to trust like this centralized authority to run a node for you, and everyone else just runs these. I don't think Ethereum calls them pruned nodes or whatever, but they have some kind of node that they call it, and it's just not. It's not cutting it, right?
yeah.
Um,
You could definitely run a prune node, a prune Bitcoin node, but it still takes, starting from scratch, it takes on a, like if you were to do it on a Raspberry Pi, it takes weeks, maybe even months to fully download so it's not even about the total size of the database, because I think it's over like 700 gigabytes now. I haven't checked
mhm.
lately, but it's up there. For me, that's not the biggest issue. It's the inconvenience of even people in the US to be able to sync
Mm.
a node from scratch is getting progressively harder. And I did it myself with a node. It was actually a desktop computer, and granted, it's on a very slow network. I think it's like 25 megabits per second, but it took weeks. It was literally
Mhm.
one of the reasons why it took longer too is because it's an external hard drive. It shouldn't take
Yeah.
weeks, in my opinion. And yeah, you can prune it. You can run it on 2 gigabytes or 3 gigabytes or whatever amount of gigabytes, but it's just so inconvenient that some people would just tap out or give up or not even want to worry about it.
Yeah.
And then the other option is just buying something that's preloaded, but then you got to trust it. the whole point of Bitcoin is that you can kind of like from scratch do everything. You can create your own address by just rolling dice. You can do,
Hmm.
I mean, that's the whole point. But is there any other, so like does quantum freak you out? Is there anything that worries you? Anything else other than than the spam?
No, not really. And like quantum is, I don't know. Sometimes my conspiracy theory gets a little overactivated, and I thought, did they bring quantum FUD back out to distract from the spam issue? Um, yeah, I mean, we'll just increase the encryption if quantum ever becomes a threat, and there's going to be canaries in the coal mine, right? Because
Yeah,
Bitcoin is going to be the last to get hacked because it's the most secure. So if you see quantum computing stealing all the bank's money, then we know we've only got a limited amount of
yeah.
time to
Gives you
upgrade the
some missiles
protocol.
launching.
Yeah, exactly. So, there's going to be there will be signs that quantum has become a threat, and so I think it's going to be a hell of a lot easier to 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 hack into the rest of the world's networks than it will be Bitcoin. Like Bitcoin would be the last to fall, so we've kind of got that little bit of breathing room, and there's people working on it, right? I'm not too worried to quantum about
Yeah,
quantum. I mean,
I'm not too worried about it either. And somebody proposed that they would create a new quantum resistant address, and whoever wanted to migrate to that, you could just migrate to that. So it's not like you're making this crazy hard fork or anything. It's just
mhm.
introducing a new address. Let's say it actually became an issue. The only coins that would be at biggest risk would be like the Satoshi coins,
Yeah,
because those would be
yeah,
the first to those are the
yeah,
canaries in the coal mine, like you were saying.
yeah.
But if you do have control and they implement some of these quantum addresses that are optional, you could just migrate to that, and that's it. The ideal solution would be to just figure something out in the next couple of years that just fixes everything for everybody, including the Satoshi era coins. That would be phenomenal. But even if that wasn't an option and you could just introduce a new address type, that to me is enough.
If somebody ever figures it out, I think the ultimate quantum troll would be to move like one sat, like move one of Satoshi's single sat, like not even steal the whole million coins, but just to like, guess what? I could move them if I wanted to. Like the whole
Yeah,
like world would just freak the hell out. So I thought that would be kind of entertaining.
everybody would freak out for sure. So I'm looking at the time and I don't want to
Yeah,
take too
sure.
much because I know that you have to do your thing. So I only had one last topic to cover, and it was about leveraging credit cards and 0% introductory offers and leveraging that to buy Bitcoin and snowball that into future credit cards and that kind of thing. So can you explain how it briefly works and why you see it as advantageous?
Yeah, so I think most Bitcoiners from the very beginning understand that the only way to outperform Bitcoin, using Bitcoin is to leverage it.
Mhm.
And I think people get liquidated and wrecked because they, they're using their own Bitcoin as collateral. And if you're 50 or 100x leveraged, then this $4,000 move that we had over the weekend would have just wiped you out, right?
Yeah.
So that type of leverage we have understood will win if you get lucky, but can absolutely destroy you if you're not. But what credit card debt is, it's completely unsecured. So, you can screw up and buy Bitcoin at the top at 60K, and if it drops down to 15, it really just doesn't matter. Um, and even if you don't pay the credit card off and you just went into default, they can't come and get your Bitcoin, right? So as long as your
Repo.
Bitcoin is yeah, as long as your Bitcoin is not encumbered, um, you can just diamond hands, and 4 years later when it pumps back up to 100K, you're good to go, and you can just pay the thing off, keep the difference. And so, Bitcoiners have always known this in a mathematical sense, that leverage will allow you to outperform Bitcoin if you don't get liquidated. And Hermes just kind of applied that scenario, and really it's the same Bitcoin Treasury Company play, right? They're issuing credit at 10% interest. Bitcoin CAGR is 30 to 50% interest, and you're just capturing the spread, right? And so Hermes basically packaged that up into a 0% credit card portfolio. And, I was doing that for years when I just couldn't afford to pay the credit cards off. Like that was an act of desperation. And like, okay, I'm gonna apply for a new credit card, use that one to balance transfer the old credit card so that I'm not paying 20% interest when I bought all those things that I couldn't afford to buy. And, instead of doing it from a short term uh, perspective of buying things that you can't afford, he kind of turned it into a business model, really, and just setting up his own preferred preferred stock, really. And he's borrowing at 3 to 5%, which is the balance transfer fee. And as long as Bitcoin's CAGR is above 3 to 5%, which is a pretty low bar, then it's accretive to your personal portfolio. And he took that even one step farther. So you can just do it with Bitcoin. But the same thing is true can if you can borrow enough to be able to get 100 shares of something like a MicroStrategy at current prices. You can probably sell a covered call. I think he does very safe covered calls as well. He's got a lot of upside built into
Yeah, he does
his.
Delta tens. Yeah.
Yeah, 10 deltas, right? And so, you know, um, he sells those, and basically the covered call premium that he's collecting is more than enough to pay the monthly minimum payment on the credit card. And over time you just capture the upside. I'm a little bit more aggressive with mine, and I sell much more aggressive strikes. And so I basically capture the monthly premium in like 1 to 2 weeks, and the other 3 to 4 weeks premium is basically my profit, but I capture much less upside than he does. So those are just trade-offs. It's a brilliant strategy as long as you are like imagining worst case scenario, right? So if you were to buy strategy at the top and you paid $50,000 for 100 shares,
Yeah.
and it crashes to 150, can you still get enough premium on those covered calls to pay a $50,000 minimum payment selling covered calls at like, the 175, 200 strikes?
Yeah.
So it's not zero risk. Like everything in the stock market is risk. Strategy could go to zero tomorrow. Bitcoin, we know it's going up forever, Laura, but it could be, it could crater by a significant amount. Which brings me to this other quote, and I can't remember who said this. I think I was watching some kind of TradFi stock trader, but his quote was, and I'm gonna change it a little bit to Bitcoin, is there's two types of Bitcoiners: those that think that they know what Bitcoin's or that don't know what Bitcoin's going to do in the short term, and people who don't know that they don't know.
Yeah.
So like, it's fun to make price predictions. Oh, I think Bitcoin's going to be this, and I think Bitcoin's going to be that. But I mean, that's just all for fun. I don't even trust the people who look at the charts. And I guess the power law people have a little bit longer of a track record of being pretty close and correct. But even then, I'm not going to like take that as gospel, and that just has to happen. So I think in the short term, there's really no telling what Bitcoin will do, what strategy will do. I think over long periods of time, we know it's going up forever, Laura. And so, holding spot Bitcoin, holding shares of these Bitcoin treasury companies, I think is the much lower risk play. But yeah, anytime that you can add leverage to a portfolio that's responsible, that doesn't cause you, potentially to get liquidated, it's all fair game. But just keep in mind that you have to be able to withstand those price swings.
I think that the hardest thing is if you don't have an actual stable job, how do you pay for the credit card, even at the minimums? I mean, you should be able to pay it, I would assume, because even if you take
Yeah,
slivers of the covered calls, or even if you sell a portion of the Bitcoin, if you hold Bitcoin, if you didn't do that, then you could pay it with your actual job's income. So as long as you can do that, you're able to do it. So I'm trying to think of like what's kind of like with a poor man covered call, like what is the unexpected risk that people can
poor
be
man's
surprised
covered
by?
call would be the riskiest way to do it, because if you're buying poor man's covered calls in strategy when the price was 450 and you're buying even being extremely conservative, if you were buying the 250 strikes,
Yeah.
that would mean that the price of strategy would have to drop by 50% to go out of the money. It happened.
Yeah.
So I think poor man's covered calls would be the riskiest way to do this particular strategy. But let's just go back and just look at it as Bitcoin. There's two ways to look at this. You could actually do it. And let's just think of the worst possible time to do it, right? So when it hits 65 or whatever, if you took out a credit card loan and bought Bitcoin with it, and you literally didn't have a covered call strategy, you just got however much Bitcoin you could get. And actually, let's just say you were able to get like some, high, um, high balance, and you were able to get one Bitcoin, and then the price dropped to 15K. You can still make that monthly payment throughout the entire bear market, and you'll still end up with more uh, dollars in 2024, whatever the heck it was, when we hit all-time highs again. So even in the worst possible way, as long as you don't panic sell, it does work. And if you look at any of the Bitcoin retirement calculators, have you seen the Bitcoin Fire? I think the guys
Yeah.
that created it was called Hornet Hodl
Yeah. I've seen
Hornet.
it.
Yeah. That's really the same philosophy, right? You have to get your Bitcoin stack high enough to a certain amount that your annual expenses, like let's say your retirement expenses are 100 grand a year, 200 grand a year, whatever, even during Bitcoin's 75% fluctuations, is your stack large enough to make sure that you can still pay your rent and buy groceries, and then as long as you don't go completely broke in 30 years, your 10 Bitcoins worth $100 million, and it doesn't matter at that point. um,
Yeah.
it's a very similar philosophy to that, is that um, you just have to avoid liquidation. And as long as we continue on this path of no one ever holding for 4 years and losing money, as long as that continues into the future, then I think this type of strategy works out.
Only one last question because it's
Uh-huh.
people love it. So we're currently at about 90,500 per Bitcoin. Where do you see Bitcoin in 5 and 10 years? What do you think?
Holy crap. Okay, so I thought we were talking 1 year, but yeah, why let's go low time preference here, right? So 5 years. Yeah, I mean it's
Yeah, let's
probably
say
flirting.
2030, 2035.
Yeah, we're probably flirting with a million, but maybe not quite getting there. I would say it has to be a million by 2035. Um,
I would think so. Well, that also goes with the power law, right? I think power law is 2032, 2035. It'll be around that number.
yeah, yeah,
The point is that it's higher, and
yeah,
that's kind of
exactly.
the important thing. Man, thank you so much for your time. I know that you have to stream now, so
Sure.
anybody who, well, this is not live, but if anybody sees this, I'm sure that you will be streaming at some point today,
Yeah,
whatever you see this.
I'll be on a I'll
Yeah,
be, I'll
okay,
be on a new all-time high episode number by the
yeah,
by the
right.
time this gets released.
Hopefully, man. So, yeah, just tell everybody where they can find you.
Oh yeah, so I'm on X, at Nithu Sezni. I actually just started posting on Nostr as well. I'm kind of hoping that that really takes off. It's even more in the decentralized Bitcoin ethos. So it, I can't lie. Nostr is not as satisfying of an experience as X, but these centralized platforms are strategically feeding you things that will get you hooked. And it could be things that make you happy and make you click, or things that make you angry, like our little back and forth about Cora Knots yesterday. So Nostr is very um, Bitcoin centric. And so I would encourage anybody to get on there. We always say that we're still early, and I think Nostr is early. But it's also kind of refreshing to be on that website and not be a target of the algorithm. So
Yeah.
for now, it's less satisfying and less enjoyable, but at the same time, I think it's a little bit easier to get on and post and not waste half the day as well. So there's a little bit of a benefit for it to be a little bit less satisfying and addicting as something like X. But yeah, you can find me on both of those platforms. Obviously, on X and YouTube, I'm filming my Orange Pill Investor channel, and of course, I do True North with the guys every Wednesday.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for your time. And man, I can't thank you again. I mean, I pretty much said it in the beginning of the intro that the information that you provide, the videos that you stream every day or almost every day, they provide an insane amount of value to a lot of people, and retail specifically that aren't trained. And I'm not saying that you're giving financial advice or that kind of thing, but
Right.
you give practical real life use, which is what I guess it's more than what most people can probably ask for. You know, like what are you actually doing? You're showing it and you're not hiding anything. It really is commendable. So thank you so much, man.
Appreciate it. This has been great.
All right.
Anytime.
Thank you, man. Bye bye.